So like now I'm officially an academic because I teach in a university, but I have worked in field. I have gone on to take that learning into my PhD, and I've also worked in a project called PMRDF, which is a Government of India project for rural development. So I have been seeing the problems from multiple perspectives, and which is something that has informed my research and my work, which is transpiring to my PhD. And interestingly, in 2009, I used to sit in that corner with another girl called, I think, Liz. We were both hired around the same time. My then mentor is no more. I was mentored by Dr. Martha Farrell, and that's how I began my journey at Priya, and then I moved on to work under KKB. So it was a very learning experience because I came from JNU. I was very proud of my theoretical learnings, but when I came here and I was sent off to Chhattisgarh as a woman researcher, I had my apprehensions because I was not sure I can do this, right? I was very used to talking about left politics. I was an active left student representative, and I had a perspective of looking at the world, but I hadn't seen rural India very closely. And then Priya decided to send me off to Chhattisgarh to study a mining and displacement project. And as I started talking to people, I realized that there weren't Naxals on the street. Nobody was shooting me down. People were more than willing to talk to people like us. So it was a whole different way of looking at the world, which started in 2009, which is what I took into my PhD. And I decided to, one of the things that I had noticed at that time in 2009 was the rural sector was an extremely complex reality. Right? And if you look at numerically the rural sector, it is still about 58% of India's population is employed in the agricultural sector. Right? So in terms of population, it's very, very important. But in terms of its contribution to GDP, it has fallen steadily and it is very low. So I wanted to understand and unpack this rural reality, and I took that challenge upon myself. My PhD is on Chhattisgarh, Gujarat and Karnataka, but today I will focus on Chhattisgarh primarily and try and compare it with Gujarat for the gap of getting that broad overview. South Asia is seen. If you talk to people in USA, they always talk about investing in South Asia because it has a lot of potential. There's a huge amount of young population, so they look at it as a dividend. They're expecting to have very high growth rates, and they have people outside have a lot of faith in Mr. Modi. And so there is a lot of expectation from India, which is very good. But there is also this entire aspect that India is very high on food insecurity index, which means people are not being able to access enough food, and also nutritionally they are not accessing good food. There is about 30% of the population is in extreme poverty. If you look at scholars who write on agriculture, and some call it agrarian distress, which means that there is a lot of distress in the agricultural sector, they point out to the fact that there has been a significant number of farmers who have committed suicide from 1997 onwards, and they blame the government, the policies of privatization, etc. to it, and they would basically argue that agriculture as an entire sector and the rural economy is going through some kind of distress. And you also have the richest 1% holding 58% of India's wealth, which is only going up, and there is a severe economic inequality which has come up in India in the last 10-12 years, which is quite shocking because in principle we are a democracy and we always talk about rights and freedom of every individual should be equal, and how do you guarantee that kind of freedom of your citizens without guaranteeing equality is a huge paradox. And given the income inequality has only been going up, it is going to be a challenge in the coming years for a democracy like India. I mean, you can venerate it as much as you like for being one of the largest democracies, the largest democracy of the world, but it is going to be a challenge. If people don't have enough to eat, it will affect how they vote and who they vote for. Now gradually moving into the topic per se, We are going to try and look for some of these questions' answers. Is the agrarian crisis really affecting all those who are in agriculture? So I just told you 15% of India's population work in rural sector, and it's not exclusively rural sector. There are people who go into construction sector to work for a while. There are people who have other businesses in cities. So it's a very mixed kind of a picture, but those who primarily have an agricultural occupation are all of them in crisis. What has been the tenets of agrarian policies since 1919 up to 2013? Because that's where really my fieldwork ends, so we wouldn't be able to talk beyond it. Assess the differential impact of policies on the classes of farmers. So I would argue that if you look at the agricultural sector, there is no one way of talking about farmers. Right? As we go through the presentation, we will see how farmer is something that actually at least talks about 6 or 7 very different kinds of people. Their income, their economic and social status, their land holding, their access to technology, all of these are very, very varied. So to call all of them farmers is highly problematic as a policy term. And then examine particularly how agrarian policies are different before and after 2004. So those of you will remember 2004 is the year when NDA loses power in the union elections and the UPA comes into politics, into power in Delhi. And that is a point which is very important because we thought that we've got rid of the National Democratic Alliance. But at the same time, the BJP continues to rule some very crucial states in India, 2 of them being Chhattisgarh and Gujarat. So the reason for this research is also to find out what does the BJP as a political party change in its state policies, the 2 states where it continues to retain power, to basically manage to come back to power in a much more consolidatory fashion in 2014 elections. So I would argue that a significant part of this 2014 victory that BJP has is related to the work that they do between 2003 and 2013 really. Because if you look at the wide literature, there are people who have pointed out that in the phase of liberalization, the expectation was that you're going to open up for letting the market in. You are going to have more and more people come in to invest in various sectors, and agriculture was one of those sectors. However, in the initial phase right after 1995, the agricultural policies were such where both BJP and Congress thought that you could completely withdraw yourself from the agricultural sector. But if you look at the policies after 2003 and 4, you will see that the government does not think you can completely get out of the sector. The government rather now starts thinking, how do you make much more targeted effort for those who are your allies within this sector? So it's not a complete withdrawal. There's a comeback of subsidies, there's a comeback of subsidy on things like irrigation, greenhouse, drip irrigation, and those are intended at very specific classes of farmers. So the 3 states that I work on, this is really for American students who don't know where these states are. You all know that. But the reason for choosing these 3 was that they all had primarily BJP in power, but also that Chhattisgarh is at a level of development which is way behind Gujarat and Karnataka. So it's a primarily a primary sector kind of economy, whereas Gujarat has a huge manufacturing sector and which continues to be its niche. And Karnataka, thanks to Bangalore and the IT boom, has moved into the tertiary sector dominating. So I also wanted to see 3 states at 3 different levels of economic development and understand what is the role of the state's policies, particularly agricultural policies, in how the various groups are being moved around. This is from a village in Bastar where the lotus is blooming. So when I started doing fieldwork, these were some of the sites that I would see. I would be very amazed because formally the BJP would not be acknowledging the tribals as their vote banks, but when you go into tribal villages, you would continuously see symbols like these on their houses where they are accessing tribal voters, convincing them to vote for them and things like that. Chhattisgarh, for those of you who don't already know, is a very new state, and it was formed to recognize the indigenous population in Chhattisgarh, and there was a movement which transpired into the formation of the state. But then Chhattisgarh has also been in limelight for the huge amount of natural resources that it has, which is coal and bauxite and water and things like that, and it has been attracting a lot of investment into Chhattisgarh. And if you go to Raipur, and anybody who's been to Raipur 10 years ago, you actually wouldn't be able to identify the city. It has developed at such a fast pace, you can actually see the investment taking shape. Gujarat, which is the other state that we will briefly touch upon, which is also under BJP, does not have any kind of Naxal movement which Chhattisgarh is experiencing. But in 2002, it has a communal riot which we all know about, the Godhra riots. It has a low human development index, very similar to Chhattisgarh, and both these states are agriculturally doing quite well. Again, to point out why this is an important information to share, between 1997 and 2003, the average agricultural growth all over India really falls. And after 2003-04, if you look at statistics, you will see that some of the states start doing better than others. Chhattisgarh and Gujarat. Gujarat particularly reaches the 10% growth rate. So people call it the phenomenal Gujarat development model. So I had done 150 long interviews, pilot survey and focus group discussions, and a large part of my presentation comes from that information. It's across 24 districts in the 3 states. The approach is interdisciplinary because I really bring in some economics, political science, development studies to understand what is going on. And there is both quantitative and qualitative methods which have been used. In terms of the people I had interviewed, you can see the most of them were farmers, but they were basically farmers who had more than 10 acres of land. So I was targeting the big farmers to understand how they are coping in the current policy regime. Are they finding it difficult? What is their access to credit? Do they have irrigation? Do they have other support from the government? So a large part of my sample size were actually big farmers with 10 acres or more. There were academics, social activists, journalists, state officials. They were the very hardest to find and talk to, but I managed to talk to some of them. And then there were private employees working in fertilizer companies, pesticide companies, to understand how they were treating the rural sector and how they were trying to intervene into the sector. So the key submission that I have, which is basically the broad finding that I would present, is that if you look at literature that talks about the main classes in India, or the big elites who control the Indian government, you would have people like Pranab Badhan talk about 3 primary classes in the 1980s. The rich farmer, obviously, the capitalists who are more urban and industrial, people who like Tatas and Birlas who are into corporate production, and then you have the professional class, which is often the white collar professionals who are working in the public sector, more rarely in the private sector in the 1980s. When I actually collated all my findings and I tried to understand who are the most important classes in India post-2000, that is not the simplistic understanding that we can go with. So that's really the unnoticed shift that I'm talking about, that we are all noticing a lot of communal violence, there are separatist tendencies, but underneath what is happening is a shift in classes and their positions in power. So the rich farmer continues to be important, I would argue, but within the rich farmer there are subclasses or fractions which are emerging. You have something called the big farmer, who are traditionally people who have more than 10 acres of land. Of course, there are states like Kerala where nobody has a 10-acre land because the density of population is very high. But in Chhattisgarh and Gujarat, they would have more than 10 acres of land. There are capitalist farmers, people who have moved into very high technology. They would have tractors, drip irrigation, they would have greenhouses. So they use a lot of technology for the sake of increasing the productivity. So they really treat agriculture as a capitalist enterprise. And then you have the gentleman farmer, who are a very new breed of faction who are coming in. They are not really farmers. There are people often like you and me who have professional class jobs or who are IAS officers, but who increasingly are finding nurseries and horticulture and floriculture as profitable enterprises. So they are bringing in money from other sectors and they are investing into agriculture. So they are not traditional agriculturists, and that would also include people like the Tatas and the Pepsis and the Ambanis, who are not traditionally farmers, but who are deeply interested in getting a part of the profit that's emerging out of agriculture, and they, despite being gentlemen, are coming into agriculture as farmers and investing a part of their profit. And one of the big advantages they're getting out of it is whatever income they have out of agriculture is non-taxable. One thing that the Indian government has not managed to change in the last 70 years is that it has never taxed any farmer. You can be a farmer with 100 acres of land, or you can be a farmer with 1 acre of land, but the policy is same for you, that you do not get taxed. So if you are a gentleman farmer like the Tatas who have 1,000 acres of land, you are still not taxed. So that is also a very lucrative opportunity which is bringing in investment from other sectors. Then you have the industrial capitalists, which is very similar to the capitalists that you have in 1980s. And then this third sector, which is the petty bourgeoisie, the third class, it is something which is very, very close to the professional class, but it is not only the professional class. It's a very complex class. I would say everything that I did not understand from the field, I have put in under that to understand probably this is what is happening. But the reason I say within the petty bourgeoisie there is an old and a new is that people who have some kind of capital, they are not entirely capitalists, they might be getting money from two different sources. So if I am a government officer in Chhattisgarh and I am working with Balco and hence I am getting some extra rent from corruption, then that would qualify me as an old petty bourgeois, because the money I am accumulating is through the source of state. But if I am a big farmer who sees a good opportunity in selling DuPont fertilizer and pesticides, and therefore I diversify and open a shop which goes on to retail fertilizers and pesticides, then I am using a market opportunity that has been brought into the market thanks to market forces opening up, and then I will be classified as a new petty bourgeois. So within the petty bourgeois you have these two subcategories which are both quite prevalent. I would say the new petty bourgeois is much more prevalent in Gujarat. The old petty bourgeois is much more prevalent in Chhattisgarh. But you do see the remnants of both of these in all the three states in some mix or the other. Moving forward, let's talk about the agricultural policy. This is the not so exciting part of the presentation. So when you look at the agrarian policy documents and you try to see what is it that the government is emphasizing on, the government is trying to bring on the table 3 or 4 key policy changes. One is called the input centricity. Input centricity basically means that they are not talking about distribution of land. That okay, you have 2 acres of land, we are going to make an organized effort to increase your land holding so that your yield can increase. The government is rather saying that you need to change the inputs that you are using. You need to use a different kind of seed, a different kind of irrigation, a different kind of pesticide to increase your productivity. So input centricity model, as Singh and Rajkot has already pointed out, is very heavily increasing the cost of cultivation. Because A, you have to change your seed, but B, all of these are of a particular kind of lumpy technology. So if you use a certain kind of seed, it's not enough to get good yield. You also have to be able to use the right kind of fertilizer, the right kind of irrigation and the right kind of pesticide to get yield. So if you make one investment, you have to go on to make each and every investment to be able to get good crops. So input centricity with privatization of seeds and irrigation is also a lumpy technology. So you incur this cost over and over again in just one cycle of production. There is a tremendous emphasis on mechanization to save labor cost. Any bureaucrat's office you walk into, they will talk about how mechanization is the future of India's agriculture. And it's a very interesting thing, as you will see what it means for the farmers. There's a promotion of high-value crops. High-value crops are things like capsicum, maize, roses, things that we traditionally have not been growing in India, but there is a significant export demand for them. So you classify them as high value because you can sell them for a very high price. And there's a lot of emphasis from the side of the state that you move from not just commercial crops like cotton or groundnut to more high-value crops like flowers and capsicum. There's also planning for a secondary revolution in Gujarat. There's been a shift towards private irrigation. So the government used to invest quite significantly on things like canal building, tank building and things like that. If you look carefully at the documents, you will see that the money has not, the subsidies haven't moved out of irrigation, but they are not being put into canal and tank. They are rather being put into drip irrigations and things like that to subsidize the more fancy forms of irrigation, where the farmer has to bear at least half of the cost and the government is going to put in the other half of the cost. And greenhouse subsidy is a huge subsidy. Gujarat gives almost 50 to 70% greenhouse subsidy to promote high-value crops. So the emphasis is on chemical inputs and technology-driven agriculture. And if you look at literature, there's already evidence that when you bring in such technology-heavy mechanization, it is bound to be not resource neutral. So while it is scale neutral, you can have a 1 acre land piece or a 10 acre land piece, you're going to have the same kind of increase in productivity, but you will not be able to adopt that kind of technology at the same rate because it requires you to put in a certain amount of money from your side. These are broadly the districts that I visited. As you can see, I concentrated on the center of Chhattisgarh because that's where the big farmers are concentrated. The northern and the southern are much more hilly. They are concentrated by the tribal population and they have much smaller land holdings. So I concentrated on the central plains where you have the big and capitalist farmers working. In Gujarat, again, you see I work primarily in the center of Gujarat where you have a significant farmer lobby. You also have the Bharatiya Kisan Sangh, which operates very actively. It's the RSS wing of the farmers. And here also there is a concentration of cotton and commercial cropping. So there is enough investment capability to move to high value crops, but not everybody is moving to high value crops as yet. One of the fascinating things that I found in the particular document called the Agrovision document of Chhattisgarh is in 2010 the government declares that it is going to invest primarily on the 30% of the farmers who own 70% of the agricultural land, and the state would immediately focus on them to maximize the impact of its schemes. This is, if for those of us who have seen the political economy and any kind of planned documents in the 50s, 60s, 70s and 80s would recognize that it's a huge shift from what the government intended to do with the rural population. So if when you are talking about 30% of farmers, you are immediately saying that the other 70% of farmers who do not have big land holdings, who are not capable of taking the risk of investment, you are not going to give them the subsidy or you're not going to target your programs toward them. And that's an extremely exclusionary vision from the side of the government. When I spoke to bureaucrats in Gujarat and in Chhattisgarh, they would repeatedly refer to these kind of farmers as either the capable farmers or the progressive farmers. So whenever I would ask them that, what is the vision of agriculture, they would tell us that we are with the capable farmers. We want to work with those who can make use of the money. But that basically took me back to the point that this 30% of farmers who are capable in eyes of the government are the people who are going to be the focus of a policy like this. So, to break it further, if you look at the 1997-2004 policies, there was, as I already told you, quite a withdrawal from the side of the state. There were less number of subsidies on fertilizer, irrigation. There were less number of banks offering loans to farmers. But if you look at 2004 to 13, you see that there's a significant increase in subsidy on fertilizer, on irrigation. There are banks which are ready to give loans out. The cooperative societies in many of the villages are reactivated, but they are all working towards particular kind of high-value crops. They are trying to instill the culture of growing horticulture and floriculture. They are also trying to discourage farmers from continuing to grow crops like barley and pulses, which historically have been the staple food for people in these parts of the country. So, the point that I just made, the small farmers who constitute 70 to 80% of Chhattisgarh's agrarian population are not the part of the agro-vision of the state. The food for the tribals is also quite under threat because people are moving out of growing paddy, koda khurki, pulses, things that these populations have been historically consuming, and therefore they are faced with food security. Of course, Chhattisgarh would immediately have an answer that they have a very active PDS, which is being able to provide some kind of relief, but there's enough literature which shows that it's not an adequate relief. There is also a significant problem of access to water that's going on. If I take one example, Chapa, in the district of Chapa in Chhattisgarh, there are 54 MOUs which have been signed. And all of these new power plants which are going to come up are going to redirect the water away from agriculture into industries. So all those people who had double cropping land, so they used to get twice, they would get paddy twice a year, they would not be able to get more than once a year of paddy a year. So that's making the situation even harder. There's a lot of pressure on land in Chapa, Korba, Raipur, Bilaspur, wherever you go in central of Chhattisgarh, because of the rapid mining, industrialization and urbanization, and that's also putting a lot of pressure on the farmers in terms of what they can do with their land. So if you are a farmer who's extremely unwilling to give up your land, like in Raigad, there are farmers who are not ready to give up their land. But if you have an adjacent village which has given up the land thanks to the pollution of water and air, your land is also losing its fertility. So you can retain your land, but if you don't have the same kind of fertility, it's a much harder struggle to continue. And eventually many of these people are giving in and giving their land up. So it's a very precarious situation in Chhattisgarh. If you ever go there, you would feel the dire state that these farmers are. One data is 9,000 farmers have died in just 3 years between 2009 and 11. Gujarat's farmer suicide, for whatever reason, you don't have similar kind of data. Probably the problem is not as severe or the data is not available, we don't know what's going on. So one of the, if you go into Chhattisgarh, you will see that the government has these big calls called paddy brings poverty. So one part of the deal is that they are trying to actively push for high value crops. The other part of it is that they are actively discouraging you from growing paddy. And it's very contradictory because when I was on field in 2011, the government received the highest producer of paddy award from the government of India. And there was a huge festival. There were thousands of farmers who came into that festival. There was a lot of talk about how it's the rice bowl of India and we need to celebrate Chhattisgarh for it, etc. But it did not take down the paddy bring poverty kind of slogan that the government continues to give, and how you need to move to soybean or capsicum or some other kind of commercial cropping to be able to sustain your life. There's also effect of uncertainty of crop prices. So paddy, of course, is partly procured by the government, but a lot of other crops are not procured at all by the government. So you are at the mercy of the traders to sell your products. So what ends up happening is that farmers, every alternate or once in every 3 years, end up going into deep price crash, and therefore they are not even able to recover the cost that they've invested in producing their crops. This brings us to the central question, who is a farmer? So when we think about a farmer, what is the first thing that we think about? So that's exactly what I also thought. And as I walked into the office of the bureaucrats of Chhattisgarh and Gujarat, they would tell me that the farmers' biggest problem in the last 10 years has been that they are suffering because of increase in wages of laborers, suggesting that these farmers are not people who work on their fields. So when I would ask them that, why is the cost of labor such an issue for them, they would say because how can they work without laborers? They are either in cities or they work in some kind of an urban job, or they are just generationally have never cultivated themselves. So this cost of labor, and they would blame Narega for it in a big way. That Narega has actually heightened the price, the cost of labor. And that was one of the moments when I realized that the understanding that we as bookish people have of a farmer and what the bureaucracy is thinking as a farmer and the direction that they are trying to take their agrarian policy are completely different. The farmers that they are bothered about are the people who never till the land. They are not bothered about the 80% of farmers who till the land. The 20%, the agrovisions, that 30% that they are talking about, who own 70% of the land and never till the land and will never have to till it because quickly they will replace the requirement of labor by various kind of machines. Those are the farmers who these policies are intended for. And therefore they would always talk about how सरकार को भी किसान का फिक्र है, progressive farmer को हम हर तरीके का support करेंगे. They would tell me examples of people in Surat and Rajkot and Durg and Bemetara who are making apparently crores of rupees in horticulture, who have gated communities and stuff, but they would never talk about those who have a 1 acre or 2 acre land. They would never talk about those who are don't even have land but have been tilling the land for all these years. So that's one of the moments in my fieldwork when I realized that the idea of agricultural policy is so biased in favor of the top 20% of the farming community that it's wrong to think about farmers as a homogeneous entity. So this woman, for instance, is a Satnami farmer. It's not a story that I covered, it's a story covered by Open in 2009. So this is in Durg, where the woman is was the owner of a few acres of land. And there's a set of Haryana farmers who have come in, who are really good at capitalist agriculture. They have come into Chhattisgarh and they have basically thrown all of these families out of their land, and they've created a huge gated community of more than 100 acres where they grow very high value crops. And this woman, her husband died in that fight for not wanting to give up his land, and now she's back in working for that Haryana capitalist farmer as a worker. She basically lives in a shanty within that gated farm. She works there as a kind of bonded labor. She has no other source of employment, but she has no other place to go because there is no other skill that she has that allows her to go anywhere else. And now that her husband is gone, she's the only person who has to earn a living for the children. So the only available livelihood she's already taken up. And again, when I spoke about this woman to the bureaucrat, they would completely say there are no Haryana farmers in Chhattisgarh. Whoever has told you this is some wrong information. We have nobody coming from Haryana into Chhattisgarh. So at that point the conversation would end. The other thing that's going on field is this new policy. I just told you there's a lot of emphasis on new seeds, new pesticide and new fertilizers. So when you think about these things, we often would blame Cargill and DuPont and Monsanto and they are the bad people, they are killing all our crops, we need to get rid of them. But when you go into field and you see these shops, who do you think own these shops in the towns and suburbs of Chhattisgarh and Gujarat? Cargill and Monsanto and DuPont are not manning these shops, neither are they making the day-to-day profit from it. They have given these out for retailing to local people. And once again, these local people are the big farmers or the capitalist farmers who are local people who knows the other small farmers in the villages. They are using their local network to sell the products. They are using their language skills, their caste hierarchy, their position of power to basically convince these small farmers and laborers to buy more and more of the products and use it. So when you think about what has changed in India, these people are not only the gainers of the subsidy directly coming from the government, they are also now have a whole new set of opportunity. There are so many tractor shops when you go into the highways from Raipur going towards Bilaspur and Durg, and those, especially those going towards Durg and Bemetara, they are all owned by local big farmers who are now diversified into tractor shops and seed shops and pesticide shops. So it isn't that Cargill or Monsanto is physically coming down there to oppress the farmers. There are people who are locally there who are gaining at the cost of these people who are buying these more and more and using all these fertilizers and chemicals in the fields. Of course, Gujarat is way ahead in this diversification, because in some parts of Chhattisgarh, particularly in the eastern part of Chhattisgarh, in Bilaspur and Dhamtari, you have less number of people diversifying. You still have Marwaris and Gujaratis who have some of these shops and trading in these products. If you go into Gujarat, you have no outsider in these markets. It is entirely controlled by original big farmers who have diversified into these shops, and they completely control the trade of these products. So the new policies benefit the farmers who have the capital to invest in inputs, and they also are people who have the capability to irrigate. So if you go into these villages, you would interestingly see that there would be one big pump set in one village. So the big farmer owns the pump set, so he's irrigating his own fields. But when the pump set is not being used by him, the smaller and the middle farmers would come and pay exorbitant rent and take those pumps on hire. So that's also an added source of income. Now that you are into these kind of seeds and these kind of high value crops, all of them require extreme use of water. And because there is not enough canal water, not enough tank water, you have to go back to the same big farmer and ask for the pump on rent. And because he or she is the only, it's always he, is the only person who owns the pump, whatever the charges they charge you, you take the pump and irrigate your field. So you have the subsidy in their favor. They are going into these trading of seeds and pesticides. They are also making money by renting out their pumps and their tractors. So there's a whole new set of income that's coming into their way. So this person is a middle farmer, but he has some kind of government job. So he has gone full-time into trading. And this is again in Chhattisgarh. He basically takes all the crops from the village where he comes from, and just in villages, and he goes into Korba city and sells them for more than 10 times the price. This is again a very obvious thing that happens in rural economy. If you cannot afford the truck, go and transport it and sell your products in a town or a city, you always get 1/10 or 1/100 of the profit. So this is again a case where a farmer who has some kind of government connection has managed to invest and become a kind of trader and is doing quite well for himself. So this is exactly what I was telling you. On the western side of Raipur, so Belutara, Durg are the districts on the west of Raipur, more towards Bombay. There you have a kind of capitalist farmers with high value crops, including the Jat farmers who have come from Haryana. They are also exactly in these districts, and they have abundance of water. They have managed to even stop industries from coming in. They are doing very, very well in capitalist agriculture. Whereas if you look at the more east of the state, that is basically the east of Raipur, in Bilaspur, Dhamtari, Korba, you have farmers who are more settled in big farmers. They might be diversifying into small trades, but they are not interested in high value crops. They continue to grow paddy. But the interesting thing that they have managed to do is many of them, after the formation of Chhattisgarh as a state, have managed to get into the state bureaucracy, because a significant part of big farmers of the eastern side were OBCs. And the Chhattisgarh government has given a huge reservation to OBCs in the bureaucracy. So they have diversified and they've gone into the professional jobs like in the 1980s that we saw. So they are now a part of the old petty bourgeoisie. One more thing that is making agriculture quite in favor of already those who have the capability to invest is the fact that access to credit has become extremely hard in the last 15 years. So while you need a lot of money to be invested in seeds and irrigation and greenhouse, etc., increasingly you have a tendency when banks are having to lend out money, they would rather lend out money to a PepsiCo or a Tata or a big farmer who has all the evidence that they can pay back, rather than to someone who has no way to pay back money. So that is kind of creating a new spiral where those who already have less money are marginalized. They have to go and seek money from informal sources at exorbitant rates of interest, and which is kind of pushing them further down in the entire unequal social structure of rural Chhattisgarh and Gujarat. I love this building. This is the Bharatiya Kisan Sangh building in Gandhinagar. This is the RSS farmer organization. It's an extremely posh building with some very posh people inside. They are all farmers, but they are all big capitalist farmers, their land sizes. All the people I interviewed had more than 15 acres of land. They were all into mechanized, used tractor, used irrigation, used pumps. They were all into cotton. And there's a significant cotton lobby under the BKs operating in Gujarat. If you come to Chhattisgarh, you again have the presence of BKs precisely in the western districts of Raipur. You do not have a presence of BKs in the eastern districts, which goes to show that BK is trying to galvanize the support of the progressive farmers according to the government, rather than the masses of farmers who have very little going for them, and they are not the cause that the BKs wants to represent. So this really is, I mean, I tried to pictorially represent what I've been trying to talk about. There's a polarization that is setting in the agrarian society, with the state subsidies going for the proprietary classes. So the capitalist farmers are those who are moving into high value crops and they are into capitalist agriculture. Big farmers are also gaining, but not because they are into capitalist agriculture, but because they are either into retail shops of seeds and pesticides, or they have professional jobs, or they are into the state bureaucracies. You have the gentleman farmers like the Tata, Pepsi, or officers and professionals. You see a lot of them in Karnataka who are coming into agriculture again for the sake of the profit in the high value crops. And then you have the rest. People who have poor access to credit, to irrigation, to water, to seeds, and 70 to 75% of the agrarian population who are just left there because they are not important to the agricultural growth vision of the state. And unfortunately, the 20-25%, and if you look at the changing share of floriculture and horticulture, you will see a lot more is coming from them in terms of the agricultural growth that these states have been experiencing. One more piece of evidence, if you look right at the bottom, you can see that in Gujarat, there is a significant increase in large holdings. And this is something which is unprecedented in India. Almost everywhere else in India, if you look at the data on land holding, you will see that there's an increase in number of marginal and small holders, and people are losing out in terms of large holding. And the reason for that is that historically we have found agriculture not to be a profitable sector. But if you look at agriculture in Gujarat and the land holding size, there is an increase, there's a decrease in the medium size holding and there's an increase in the large size holding. So it looks like there is a tendency of people to consolidate their holdings, not move out of their agriculture because agriculture is a profitable enterprise. And this is something which is very, very new because for India and for the Indian agricultural policies. So that brings me back to the main question that who is a farmer after all. So if you go into fields and you talk to people and they talk about the people who are going to be progressive farmers, those who are going to push the agricultural growth, they are the important farmers for the government, both in Gujarat and Chhattisgarh. And in Gujarat, of course, the big favorite is the Ambanis. And they have huge mangroves. Wherever they have been buying land for industries, they are also taking over land for mangroves, for nurseries. In Karnataka, there is a lot of coffee plantation that's been taken over, bought over by the Tatas. In Chhattisgarh, there is so much Benami land transfers happening, it's unbelievable. There are a whole set of local activists who are only working on filing RTIs to find information about land transfers, because in Chhattisgarh, those kind of land transfers are actually illegal. From tribal people to transfer land in Schedule 5 areas, the procedure is much harder. But despite that, there is continuously being transfer of lands going on. So that brings me back to the question of, yes, we have a farmer-friendly state. Yes, we have this amazing agricultural growth that's going on. But who are the farmers that we are targeting at, and who are the farmers that we are working for? That's what I have to say.
Thank you, Sejuti.